Continuing my recent look at all things Batman, now I think it's fair to say that Batman is one of the most popular and most enduring superhero characters of all time. And as a consequence, at some point or other, he's had a toy made of virtually every single iteration of the character, regardless of whether it's in film, whether it's in a TV animated series, whether it's in a computer game, or from the original comic book source material. And there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of Batman action figures across the years, which have given joy to both children and adults alike. But not all of them were good. So I thought it might be fun to turn my attention away from the really great Batman toys and instead dedicate an episode of Weird and Wonderful to looking at some of the less impressive Batman releases over the years. Okay, so to kick us off, I'm going to start with Batman Returns, because it's this toy line from Kenner that really establishes what would be an ongoing trend for Batman toys. And that is essentially trying to find different ways to sell the same figure again and again and again. And to some extent, I can understand Kenner's dilemma. They want to sell lots of toys based on this very popular film or franchise. But in the case of Batman Returns, they only have one hero, Batman, and he only wears the one costume throughout the entire film. So this is where Kenner had to get creative and find new ways to sell new Batman figures. So their novel approach was to take the same figure, literally the same mold, and repaint it. Give him a few extra accessories, and voila, you have a brand new Batman. Now, to a certain degree, I can understand the logic in doing this. After all, Batman's had many different looks across the years. My problem comes in when really some of the paint applications really fly in the face of logic and reason. Why does Batman, a character who obviously operates by night in stealth, need a bright yellow costume to deep dive under the water? I mean, sure, he may have an underwater mission every now and again. I don't know why I'd be wearing bright neon yellow colours though. I also fully appreciate the counter-argument that kids love bright primary colours and they're attracted to that, so it's going to help sales. I get that, but to be honest, even as a kid, I hated stuff like this. I wanted things to be relatively authentic, but fun to what I saw on screen. And when I saw something really outlandish like this, it didn't appeal to me because I wanted the real thing. But that, I'm afraid, is only one of the bones I have to pick with this line. The other major issue with this line is that whilst they only had one hero in Batman Returns, there were a number of different villains. And to be fair, I think they did a fairly decent job with the Catwoman figure that was released. What boggles the mind is their approach to the Penguin, because they've recycled a Penguin from another toy line and just given him a slightly different paint job. But this bears no resemblance to the Danny DeVito version of the Penguin we see in Batman Returns. Now, this may be because they were concerned about the way that Penguin looked. It maybe is a bit too scary for children. But considering it's part of the Batman Returns line, I'm not sure why they didn't just go for a different mould. I suspect it might have just been cheaper. To make matters worse, they've taken dramatic license when it comes to some of the vehicles as part of this line. And again, the Penguin takes centre stage here for strangest, as he's given the umbrella jet. Of course, this is a creation of pure fantasy. I don't believe this has ever appeared anywhere in any medium of the Batman universe. And whilst I understand that they want to have a vehicle for the Penguin to drive, I actually think there was the perfect vehicle in the film itself. The Duckmobile that he actually drives around, which is larger than life. It's fantastic and perfect for a toy. All they need to do is strap on a couple of rocket launchers and you would have a perfect toy there. So I'm not sure why they didn't do something that was just more faithful to the film. And then finally, probably the funniest and most extreme example in this wave is the Penguin Commandos. Now, these are pretty faithful to the film, and I commend that, but releasing two in-action figures, because there is no posability on these figures on their own, single-carded, is a little bit rich. I think if they included them with the Penguin, that would have been absolutely fine and kind of cool, but as it is, this is a pretty strange release to have on the shelves. Now, sticking with Kenner for the time being, and looking at the Batman the Animated Series of toys. Now, this was a pretty broad range, and also pretty awesome. I loved these toys as a kid, and they did a pretty fantastic, diverse collection of characters, and all sorts of vehicles and play sets. But even super successful lines have their share of stinkers. And once again, we see Kenner experimenting with quite imaginative ideas for variations on the Batman costume. And there's certainly a few examples here where maybe they let their imagination run away a little too much, as things get a little bit strange, wondering just quite what inspired some of these. And there's some very notable examples here. We have things like Land Strike Batman. I'm not entirely sure what this massive contraption is, why it would go around his neck like this. It looks really impractical and quite uncomfortable. But then we've also got the Piranha Blade, which looks pretty fearsome and quite deadly. But then we have a couple of just strange ones, which are fairly inexplicable. It seems to serve no purpose. We have the Bat Signal jet, which is a jet that Batman apparently flies to shine the bat signal. I'm not quite sure what this is supposed to do exactly. It seems a little bit defunct, a bit unnecessary at this stage. The bat signal, of course, is there to signal Batman, to let him know that he needs to meet Commissioner Gordon and solve a crime. It's a bit strange for Batman to be stalking criminals by shining a light of his logo in their eyes. That seems a little odd. But hands down, my favourite for being absolutely batty has to be the Decoy Batman. This seems to be kind of really scraping the barrel here when it comes to coming up with an imaginative variant for this character. What is the Decoy Batman? Well, it's essentially Bruce Wayne dressed in the Batman costume, but it has a false front so that he can throw that front off at criminals and reveal his identity. I don't know. I really don't know. This is a really surreal notion. I don't understand what's driving this. I don't get any sense of logic behind it. To me, this is a Batman toy as designed by David Lynch. It's incredibly surreal and it just leaves me scratching my head. Okay, so just to prove that it isn't just Kenner who is guilty of some of these very strange variant choices, we now have a look at Hasbro. Hasbro released a line called Total Justice, and this was really a Justice League line, which featured a couple of Batman appearances. But again, whilst this line is mostly respectable, the Batman choices are a little bit odd. Here we have the fractal armor Batman. Now, I don't know what the hell that means. I don't know what the fractal armor is. All I know is he's got this pink, hard substance sort of all over his body without much rhyme or reason. I can't tell. I think it's meant to be armor, but I'm not sure what kind of armor it's meant to be. He comes with a big bazooka kind of weapon, again, which seems a bit incongruous for Batman. But the thing that strikes me most with this figure when I look at it is the fact that he's got these scales over his eyes, and I have to wonder, can he see? Back to movies now, and things don't get better with sequels, it seems, because by the time we get Batman Forever, they're really starting to take things up a notch when it comes to experimental costumes for Batman. We have things like this Fire Guard Batman with spinning attack cape action. I don't know what that means, I don't know what it does, but you can see Kenner are definitely pushing the limits of their illustrators' creativity when we look at the images at the top of the packaging here. They've definitely interpreted this figure as being Batman on fire. And then we have this Lightwing Batman, which looks very colourful, but again, he seems to be straddled with this huge, massive contraption, which doesn't look practical or comfortable. And again, in terms of being quite stealthy, probably going to give him away. And then we have a release in this line, which actually could have been really, really fun. The idea of a Bruce Wayne transforming into Batman, that would have been a really, really cool figure. Except the Batman costume he's transforming into is completely wrong. This doesn't look like any Batman we know. It's certainly not the one that appears in the film. And why has he got extra blades that go on his arms? Now, you could be forgiven for thinking that some of the other examples I've touched on so far are a product of their time, being made in the early 90s. This was a time of hypermasculinity and over-the-top weaponry, as was very popular in a lot of different toy franchises at the time. Well, the Batman Begins line from Mattel just goes to show that even a more grounded approach to both the films and the toys There was still plenty of room for creative license and just pushing the envelope a little too far. Indeed, most of the toys in this lineup were much more faithful to the material they were based on, i.e. the film Batman Begins. Most of the gadgets and action features more or less reflected what we had seen in the film. But then we had things like Electro Strike Batman. To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking at. This to me just looks like Batman with some very ropey string wrapped around him that I think is meant to emulate some sort of electrical strike, but it looks pretty strange, pretty outlandish, and just completely at odds with the Batman Begins tone. Sadly, things only get worse with the Drop Attack Batman and Laser Blaster Batman, and even Light Suit Batman. Now, as you can see looking at these all look pretty colourful, pretty over the top, and yeah, completely incongruous with the whole point of stealth, and very much the Batman Begins approach to this toy line. And next up we have an even more recent example of strange goings on in the Batman toy world. This is the Rainbow Batman from DC Direct. This is essentially a set of 6 Batman figures in the 7-inch scale, all exactly the same, but with each one with a different paint variant, and they're all, of course, very colourful, very bright rainbow colours. I got to be honest, I really don't get this. This is obviously aimed exclusively at adult collectors. This isn't really aimed at children, and although they look nice and colourful, I can't really see the appeal of this and why you'd want 6 Batmen all identical but in different shades. Like I said, they look nice, but I don't know if I want to buy them and put them on my shelf. Hasbro's Mission Masters is a pretty odd line. It was fairly successful, running to 4 waves, and most of its offerings seem to be updates of Batman the Animated Series figures, but with all new designs, colours and action features. And pretty much all of these are odd. They all feature quite bright neon colourings and pretty strange ideas. But there's certainly a couple that really stand out, one of them being the antivirus Bruce Wayne. Now, there's a couple of things to unpack here. First of all, they've taken the notion of antivirus, and I'm assuming they mean antivirus software, as in fighting a computer virus rather than an actual biological virus. It's really difficult to tell because this figure comes with a ring of fire, which I'm wondering is meant to be a firewall, made literal, or whether it's just a permanent ring of flame to just dispose of any living germs in the area, in which case this seems like a really impractical, really dangerous way to deal with a virus. Perhaps it might have been cheaper and a bit more convenient to simply design a mask that would filter out any germs that may be in the air. But if it is a technological virus, like a computer virus he's fighting, again, I'm not entirely sure how a big giant flamethrower is really going to help with that problem. Also, it is kind of odd that this is specifically Bruce Wayne and not antivirus Batman. I feel like I'm missing some really important information from this figure. Like, there's an awful lot of context and background that's missing to make this make sense. It's Bruce Wayne in the Batman suit, but without the cape and cowl. Instead, he's got this... well, I'm not entirely sure what it is, to be honest, but he's wearing some kind of contraption that seems to be belching flame. Good luck to you, Bruce. But even this isn't the worst example in the line. That honour goes to the Virus Attack Mr. Freeze. So once again, we're sticking with the virus theme. Still not making much sense to me, to be honest. And this time we have Mr. Freeze, well, we have Mr. Freeze's head, and he has a spider body. Yeah, definitely missed the memo on that one. I don't know what this virus is or what it does to you, but if this is the effect, then no wonder Bruce Wayne has that antivirus suit. So at number 3, we're back to Kenner, and in fact, I'm going to stick with Kenner for the next 3 entries. This time around though, I'm going to focus on the Night Force ninjas. Now, once again, in the 90s, there was quite a lot of interest in ninjas, and they made their way into an awful lot of toy lines, and usually the results were pretty awful when they were forced in, where it didn't feel natural. Now, in some ways, Batman should have been a natural line to take that approach. After all, he does have martial arts training, and a lot of the characters around him could have been exploited to do an interesting, legitimate variation on that theme. But I gotta be honest, despite being called Night Force Ninja, I really don't see an awful lot of influence of ninja culture in these figures. They seem to be just outlandish, really bright and colourful, but I'm not really getting the connection. To me, this smacks of a committee decision where a buzzword has been plucked out by marketing to sell toys and stick it on the packaging, and I think that's what must have happened. But to be fair, there are a handful of decent figures in this line. We have the Azrael, the Killer Croc, the Robin, they're all fine. But poor Batman himself doesn't fare so well. We have things like this Arsenal Cape Batman. Now let's just ignore the colour scheme, which is horrible. That makes no sense. But let's focus on the action feature. It seems to be this is a cape that fires knives. Don't try this at home, kids. And then we have Shirtless Batman, or Fist Fury Batman, whose fists rotate really, really fast. Again, with blades in his hands, or whatever this is meant to be. Very strange. He's then given an extra piece of chest armour that somehow managed to obscure his face completely, so presumably he's blind when he's wearing this. Again, I'm not even going to touch on the strange colour scheme, the lime green and the bright purple. Make of that what you will. The other odd thing about this figure though is the fact that he's still got the cowl on underneath, and he seems to have a microphone as well. So I guess he's talking to someone when he's doing this. There's too many questions. But to make matters worse, they drag the Batmobile into this, and this is a repainted Batmobile. The car itself is absolutely fine. It's the shocking paint apps that really befuddle me on this one. Again, no idea how this connects to Night Force ninjas, what this has to do with anything, but for some reason Batman's now driving a lime green Batmobile. I mean, I definitely think Batman's been hanging out with the Joker too long, because this is exactly the kind of thing the Joker would drive. So, I don't know what's going on, but yeah, this is weird. And then we have the Legends of Batman line. Now, this seems to be an Elseworlds line, a line dedicated to alternate versions of Batman. And on the face of it, that sounds pretty cool, except it's not really. Want to see what Batman would look like as a knight? That's kind of interesting. Want to see him as a samurai? Well, less keen. How about as a swashbuckling pirate? Not really. As ever, there are a handful of decent figures in this wave, don't get me wrong. And one of the things I really like about this line is the fact that each of them came with a painted trading card, which I think is very, very cool. That's quite collectible, and you know, I love that stuff when I was a kid. And there's a few earnest attempts to release some proper, authentic comic book Batman characters as well, which is, for the most part, pretty well done. But then you get things like this, which is usually a Batman that is in a really awkward pose where he can't really be put into many different positions. It's really made just for the one position. It doesn't look like Batman, it doesn't feel authentic or genuine, it just looks strange to me. And then we have this rather strange but wonderful Dark Rider Batman with whipping arm and slashing motion. I guess this is meant to be Highwayman Batman, and at first glance this is kinda cool, I kinda get the appeal of this. But then when you look at the actual toy of the horse, it is just one solid piece, which loses some of the appeal. It does look a little bit naff. And I think if you look at the artwork, it's beautifully painted, but the expression on the horse's face is more than a little concerned. So there's something a bit unseemly and a bit strange about this, I've got to say. And this brings me nicely to number one, which for me has to be the Legends of the Dark Knight series from Kenner. Now, I'll definitely give Kenner kudos for trying something different here, There's a very different approach and art style to these toys. They're a lot more exaggerated, the ears on the Batman are a lot more elongated. There's definitely a very different and slightly creepy vibe to these figures. And this take works very well for some of the figures in this lineup. So I can think, for example, Scarecrow, Bane, Clayface, and even Penguin all come out of this quite well. But then we have Batman himself, and he's often presented in quite nightmarish proportions, where he's almost as threatening as the villains. There's something slightly demonic looking about this Batman, and as I said, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. But when you start giving him devil's wings and blades that extend onto his arms, and he even starts driving vehicles like the Skywing street bike, this all starts to feel pretty creepy and weird. And it's not just limited to Batman. Batgirl's had a pretty interesting makeover as well. And then some of the accessories, so for example, looking at Catwoman here, this is kind of like the power loader from Aliens, and maybe that's where they got the idea from, because of course Kenner did have a successful Aliens toy line, but it doesn't make an awful lot of sense, and it just seems a bit odd. Ultimately, we just have a line that just feels very disturbing. And it feels like we've peered in on an alternate universe of Batman that I don't really want to visit. I mean, what the hell is a neural claw Batman? I mean, it sounds painful. I mean, does he literally claw inside your brain, inside your mind? That's what it sounds like, and it doesn't sound fun. So there you have it, there's my top 10. Please do let me know in the comments what your top 10 would be, or if I missed anyone that you think should have been up here that I didn't include. I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.